Hi, welcome to my channel. I have a new story for you today.
My name is Riley Clark and I am 25 years old. At my sister's extravagant anniversary party, while I was supposed to be upstairs fetching her pearl earrings, I found an unopened letter from Yale University buried in my mother's dresser. It was dated 4 years ago. It contained a full academic scholarship. My mother had hidden it to keep me home as an unpaid nanny for my sister's children. When I walked downstairs and confronted her in front of 50 guests, she did not apologize. She took a sip of her champagne and said, "We needed you more. Harper's kids needed an aunt. And you were perfectly happy here." I left that night with a letter and $60 in my pocket. What Yale did next shocked everyone in our zip code. But I will get to that. Welcome to Sophia Vengeance. If you are listening, please subscribe and drop a comment telling me your age. I want to know who is with me today. Let me take you back to that afternoon. It was mid-July in Nebraska. The heat was stifling, the kind that smells like cut hay and melted asphalt. Harper and her husband Ryan were celebrating 5 years of a perfect marriage. And I was exactly where my mother Cynthia wanted me. Background noise. I spent 40 hours a week working as a logistics clerk and another 40 wiping down Harper's quartz countertops and shuttling her toddlers to preschool. Cynthia sent me upstairs to find her vintage earrings. I knelt on the pristine carpet of her bedroom. Pulling open the heavy oak drawers of her dresser, I pushed aside velvet jewelry boxes and silk scarves. My fingers brushed against a thick envelope tucked far in the back. Buried beneath winter gloves, the paper was crisp. The return address read Yale University Office of Undergraduate Admissions. The postmark was April. 4 years ago. I held it up to the window light. It was sealed, but it smelled familiar. A strong hit of lavender perfume. My mother's signature scent. It was not a misplaced piece of mail. The floral smell meant she had held it, touched it, and handled it repeatedly over the last one. 460 days. It was a trophy kept in the dark. My chest tightened. I remembered the exact day that postmark was stamped. I was 18, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a laptop screen. Cynthia had insisted on managing my college application accounts. She stood over my shoulder that afternoon, her hand resting heavily on my neck. Guiding the mouse, she clicked a link, and a rejection page loaded on the screen. I cried until my ribs ached. She stroked my hair and whispered that Yale was for the exceptional, and I was perfectly suited for stability here with them. I spent the next 4 years believing I was mediocre. I believed the universe had rejected me. I folded laundry and picked up Ryan's dry cleaning, thinking servitude was my ceiling. Sitting on her bedroom floor, I slid my thumb under the flap of the envelope and tore it open. The heavy cream paper inside offered a full ride, every tuition fee, every housing cost covered. I did not cry this time. The realization hit me hard and cold. I was not rejected by a university. I was sabotaged by the woman who was supposed to protect me. I stood up, gripping the acceptance letter, and listened to the clinking of champagne glasses echoing from the living room downstairs. I sit on the thick wool rug in the center of the master bedroom. The air conditioning hums through the vent above me, circulating the scent of expensive lavender spray. My knees press into the soft fibers. I hold the torn envelope in my left hand and the heavy cream paper in my right. The Yale University crest is printed in dark blue ink at the top center. Below it, the text outlines a reality that was stolen from me. Full academic scholarship, room and board covered, a generous stipend for textbooks and travel. The financial terms are laid out in crisp, formal typography. I trace the raised seal with my thumb. The document feels heavy. It feels like a parallel universe. A life where I packed a suitcase and boarded a flight to Connecticut. A life where I walked under centuries-old stone archways Instead of scrubbing the grout in a suburban kitchen, my thumb catches on a sharp ridge running horizontal across the page. A deep, deliberate fold. Cynthia bent the document in half to fit it beneath her velvet jewelry trays. She creased the paper, pressing the fibers down, flattening my future so it would remain hidden in the dark corner of her dresser. I placed the letter flat on my thigh and pressed my palm against the crease. Smoothing it out, the paper resists. The scar remains. A wave of nausea washes over me as the past 4 years recontextualize themselves in an instant. The memories do not arrive as a blur. They return in sharp, agonizing detail. I remember the second Tuesday of April. 4 years ago, the sky outside the kitchen window was bruised purple with a coming spring storm. I was 18. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The college decision portals were opening. My stomach was tied in knots. Cynthia stood right behind my chair. Her hand rested on the back of my neck, her thumb drawing slow. Rhythmic circles against my skin. It felt like maternal support. She had insisted on setting up my application accounts. She told me the process was complicated, and she wanted to ensure everything was submitted correctly. She typed the password into the admissions portal. The page loaded. The screen displayed a generic, polite rejection notice. "We regret to inform you." I stopped breathing. The rejection hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I dropped my face into my hands and wept. Cynthia did not pull me into a hug. She kept her hand on my neck, holding me in place. She leaned down, her mouth near my ear. "Yale is for exceptional children." "Sweetie," she whispered. Her voice was soft, rhythmic, and devastatingly calm. "And you are perfectly suited for stability here with us. We are your anchor. A place like that would eat you alive. You are a caregiver. Riley, you have a good heart. That is worth so much more than a degree you would struggle to finish." I believed her. I drank the poison she poured into my ear because she disguised it as medicine. I spent the next 460 days internalizing the lie that I was mediocre. I convinced myself that my ambitions were foolish, that I had aimed too high, and that the universe had gently corrected my course. I allowed Cynthia to redefine my worth. My intellect was buried, replaced by a manufactured sense of duty to the family. That duty manifested in the form of Harper. My older sister lived 3 miles away in a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial house. Ryan, her husband, was a junior partner at a corporate law firm. They were the neighborhood golden couple. They hosted charity dinners and drove imported SUVs. And I was the unseen engine that kept their pristine life running. I looked down at my hands, holding the Yale acceptance letter. My skin is dry and tight. The knuckles are red, cracked from constant exposure to bleach, degreasers, and hot water. Rough calluses line the pads of my fingers. These are not the hands of a 5-year-old woman. These are the hands of an indentured servant. The symbolism traps me in a suffocating realization. I earned these cracked hands, maintaining a kingdom that did not belong to me. I spent 4 years on my knees scrubbing the imported Italian tile in Harper's kitchen so she could host her book club in a spotless home. I spent 4 years carrying Ryan's heavy wool suits from his car to the upstairs closet, ensuring his courtroom attire remained unwrinkled. I pushed a double stroller through the sweltering Nebraska humidity, entertaining Harper's toddlers at the local park so she could attend her morning Pilates classes uninterrupted. I worked a 40-hour week at a local logistics firm, entering shipment codes into a lagging database for minimum wage. Every day at 4 inches the afternoon, I rushed from my cubicle to the daycare, picked up the twins, and drove them to the Colonial. I cooked their dinners. I bathed them. I folded the laundry. Harper would drift into the kitchen around 7, pour herself a glass of Pau Grigio, and thank me with a careless wave of her hand. She tossed me $20 bills for gas money, like I was a teenager doing her a favor. Ryan never even made eye contact. I was just Riley, the quiet, dependable sister who lacked the ambition to leave town. Cynthia orchestrated this dynamic. She built a flawless public facade, presenting herself as the matriarch of a successful, thriving dynasty. Harper was the crown jewel. Ryan was the high-earning provider. The grandchildren were the perfect accessories, but a dynasty requires labor to sustain its illusion. Cynthia did not hide the Yale letter to spare me from failure. She hid the letter because she needed a nanny. She needed an unpaid maid. She needed someone to absorb the domestic burdens of her golden child. My future was the currency she spent to buy Harper's comfort. The grief burns away, evaporating into the cold air of the bedroom. The lifelong self-doubt that chained me to this town disintegrates. A new sensation takes its place. It is cold, preciso, and calculating. I do not feel the urge to weep. I feel an overwhelming clarity. The voice in my head that constantly whispered, I was not good enough, is gone. I look back at the letter. The admissions board at an Ivy League university read my essays. They reviewed my test scores. They saw my potential and offered me a seat at their table. Cynthia stole that seat, forcing me to sit on the floor of my sister's laundry room instead. She forged a reality where my highest potential was stain removal. I run my thumb over the embossed crest one last time. The physical proof of my worth rests in my palm. I close my eyes and let the tectonic shift inside my mind settle. The submissive, obedient daughter dies on this expensive wool carpet. The woman who opens her eyes is someone Cynthia has never met. Through the floorboards, I hear the muffled sounds of the anniversary party. The clinking of crystal glasses, the low rhythmic bass of a jazz playlist. 50 guests are standing in the living room below, celebrating a milestone financed by my stolen youth. Cynthia is down there holding a flute of champagne, smiling at the community she fooled. She sent me upstairs to fetch a pair of pearl earrings, expecting me to return quietly. Playing my designated role as the helpful background character, I stand up. My joints are stiff, but my posture is straight. I turn away from the dresser and walk toward the bedroom door. The staircase awaits. The party below is about to end. The oak treads of the staircase felt different beneath my bare feet tonight. I had descended these steps thousands of times over the past 4 years. Usually, I carried overflowing laundry baskets or balanced an exhausted toddler on my hip. Tonight, my hands held only a single sheet of cream paper. The hallway below hummed with the orchestrated sounds of suburban success. Harper and Ryan were celebrating 5 years of marriage, and the ground floor of their colonial was packed. The heavy Nebraska heat remained locked outside the double-paned windows, replaced by the steady breath of central air conditioning and the scent of catered roasted tenderloin. From the shadow of the landing, I observed the ecosystem of my family functioning exactly as designed. The 50 guests forming clusters across the imported tile were a curated collection of local elites. Senior partners from Ryan's law firm stood near the kitchen island. Neighborhood association, board members, and country club regulars occupied the plush sofas. They held crystal flutes filled with expensive sparkling wine, their laughter polite and measured. 10 minutes ago, looking at this scene would have sparked a familiar pang of inadequacy in my chest. I would have tugged at the hem of my faded navy dress, hoping no one noticed the unpaid nanny lurking in the corner. Now the inadequacy was gone. It was replaced by a clinical focus. The people in that room were not superior. They were just well-funded by a crime committed against me. At the center of the largest circle stood my mother. Cynthia wore a tailored emerald dress that fit her with intimidating precision. She held court, a delicate champagne glass balanced in her manicured fingers. Harper stood beside her, wearing a designer silk slip dress, projecting the vacant, practiced smile of a woman who had never been told no. Ryan hovered nearby, looking smug in a custom slate suit, swapping golf stories with a local judge. Cynthia tapped a silver spoon against her flute, signaling for quiet. The gentle murmur of the crowd died down instantly. She commanded attention effortlessly. The matriarch who had built a flawless public facade. To my beautiful daughter, Harper and her devoted husband, Ryan, Cynthia began. Her voice projected with practiced warmth. 5 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, and a home that is truly the heart of our community. Watching you build this life has been the greatest joy a mother could ask for. You are the picture of what family should be. Strong, united, a true foundation. The guests murmured in agreement, raising their glasses in unison. Harper leaned her head on Ryan's shoulder, playing the part of the adored wife. I tightened my grip on the acceptance letter. The paper remained crisp against my palm. I stepped off the landing and walked into the bright light of the hallway. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of an executioner. My bare feet made no sound on the hardwood, but the crowd parted as I moved through the vaulted living room. The guests noticed the shift in the atmosphere before they noticed me. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. They saw Riley, the quiet, dependable sister, walking straight toward the center of the room with a look in her eyes that did not match the festive decor. Cynthia was mid-sentence, praising Ryan's recent promotion when she caught sight of me. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It was a micro-expression of annoyance. She assumed I was coming to report a problem with the sleeping children upstairs. She assumed I was about to interrupt her spotlight with a mundane domestic issue. I stopped less than 2 feet from her. The circle of guests surrounding her stepped back, granting us a wide perimeter. Harper frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. Ryan shifted his weight, crossing his arms over his chest. Cynthia kept her polite public smile fixed in place. "Riley, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with manufactured patience. "Did the twins wake up upstairs? We are in the middle of a toast." I did not answer. I did not scream. Crying would mean she still had the power to hurt me. And that power evaporated the moment I opened her dresser drawer. I looked directly into her eyes, maintaining unbroken contact, and raised my right hand. The Yale University acceptance letter was unfolded. The signature of the admissions director was visible. The embossed blue crest caught the light of the crystal chandelier overhead. I held the document directly over her champagne flute. Then I let go. The heavy cream paper fluttered downward and landed straight inside her glass. The liquid immediately soaked into the fibers. The dark blue ink of the official university seal began to bleed into the pale gold wine. The paper crumpled slightly, ruined in an instant, floating like a shipwreck in her crystal flute. The living room went dead silent. The jazz music playing from the hidden speakers seemed to vanish into thin air. 50 guests held their breath. No one moved. The air in the room grew dense and suffocating. In that vast, heavy quiet, a single sound cut through the tension. A sharp cracking noise echoed near the kitchen island. It was the sound of a large, square ice cube melting and shifting inside Ryan's bourbon glass. That tiny, isolated noise underscored the paralysis of the room. A prestigious law partner, a dozen local elites, the golden couple. I've frozen, watching a family implode in real time. I waited for the panic. I expected Cynthia to drop the glass, to feign ignorance, to play the victim, or to orchestrate a dramatic exit. I thought she might invent a lie on the spot, claiming it was junk mail or a clerical error. She did none of those things. Her heart rate did not appear to rise. She looked down at the ruined document, soaking in her expensive wine. With a steady hand, she reached her manicured fingers into the champagne, pinched the corner of the soggy paper, and pulled it out. Pale gold liquid dripped from the Yale crest onto the imported Italian tile. She calmly picked up a linen cocktail napkin from a nearby tray and dabbed her fingers dry. She looked back up at me. Her expression was devoid of guilt. It lacked any trace of shame. It was the look of a manager dealing with a disgruntled employee. "We needed you more," Cynthia said. Her voice was not a whisper. She spoke at a conversational volume, ensuring the guest standing closest could hear every word. She did not attempt to hide the truth. She defended it. Harp's children needed an aunt. She continued, her tone even and analytical. "You were happy here. You had a routine. You had a purpose. The East Coast would have been a waste of your time. And we needed the help. I made a choice for the good of this family." The audacity of her statement hung in the air, toxic and unyielding. She had stolen 4 years of my life, sabotaged my education, and confined me to a life of servitude, framing it as a noble administrative decision. She believed her right to my labor superseded my right to a future. I turned my gaze to Harper, my sister, the golden child, whose perfect life was built on my stolen potential. Harper was staring at the soggy, ink-stained paper dripping onto her pristine floor. She knew exactly what it was. She understood the gravity of the crime. But Harper did not defend me. She did not express horror. She simply looked away, fixing her eyes on the baseboard, choosing the comfort of her manufactured reality over the sister who had scrubbed her floors for 4 years. She was complicit in her silence. Her refusal to meet my eyes was a betrayal sharper than Cynthia's spoken words. Ryan took a step back, taking another sip of his bourbon, distancing himself from the mess. He was a lawyer. He recognized a liability when he saw one, but he remained quiet, protecting his own peace. I looked back at Cynthia. She was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the emotional outburst that she could easily write off as a tantrum. She wanted me to shout so she could call me unstable. I denied her the satisfaction. I did not need an apology anymore. An apology is a request for forgiveness, and I had no forgiveness left to give. Confronting a thief does not bring back the stolen goods. It only confirms the identity of the thief. I turned my back on her. I turned my back on Harper, on Ryan, and on the 50 guests standing in stunned silence. I walked away from the champagne, the imported tiles, and the life I had been forced to maintain. My bare feet carried me toward the front door. The invisible chains Cynthia had wrapped around my mind were broken. But walking out the front door was only the first step. I had a car with a faulty transmission and almost no money to my name. Cynthia believed that without her, I would starve. She thought my lack of resources would force me to crawl back by sunrise. She was about to find out what a woman with nothing left to lose is truly capable of doing. The humid Nebraska air wrapped around me like a damp towel the moment I stepped out of Harper's Colonial. Crickets chirped in the manicured hedges, a stark contrast to the absolute silence I had just left in the living room. I walked down the curved driveway, my bare feet hitting the warm concrete. I did not look back. I reached my car. A 10-year-old sedan with a temperamental transmission and a dent in the passenger side door. It was the only thing I truly owned. I unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The radio sputtered to life, playing a generic pop song. I turned it off. The silence was better. My apartment was a 5-minute drive across town. Located in a neighborhood where the lawns were mostly dirt and the streetlights flickered, I rented a cramped one-bedroom unit above a failing dry cleaner. The smell of harsh chemicals permeated the walls, a constant reminder of the life I had settled for. I paid $600 a month for a space that felt more like a storage unit than a home. I pushed open the door to my apartment. The digital clock on the microwave read 9:15. They expected me to come back here, wallow in my limited options, and return to the Colonial by morning with an apology. They assumed poverty and habit would chain me to them. They were wrong. I pulled 2 large duffel bags from the closet and laid them on the sagging mattress. I did not fold my clothes. I shoved them in, prioritizing winter coats, thick sweaters, and durable boots. I emptied my bathroom cabinet, tossing travel-sized toiletries and a handful of ibuprofen into a plastic bag. I grabbed my laptop, its cracked screen, a testament to its age, and its charging cable. I ignored the decorative pillows Harper had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. I left the cheap particle board furniture exactly where it was, in under 90 minutes. My entire life was compressed into the trunk and back seat of my sedan. Everything else was disposable. I wrote a brief note to my landlord, folded it around my spare apartment key, and slid the envelope under the door of his ground floor office. The lease was broken. The security deposit was forfeit. The ties were severed. I walked back to my carrying a cardboard box filled with non-pea perishable food. Peanut butter, granola bars, and a half-empty box of stale crackers. Survival rations. As I approached the sedan, a pair of headlights swept across the parking lot, illuminating the cracked asphalt. A sleek silver luxury SUV pulled in, parking at a sharp angle that blocked my exit. The driver's side door opened. Cynthia stepped out. She had not bothered to change out of her emerald dress. Her heels clicked against the pavement, the sound sharp and authoritative. She had tracked me down. She had left her own party, abandoning her guests to manage the crisis before it could mutate into a permanent problem. She walked directly to my car and placed herself between me and the driver's side door. The glow from the street lamp caught the silver clasp of her clutch purse. She looked composed, ready to negotiate a return to the status quo. "Riley," she said, her voice steady. "This tantrum has gone far enough. You made a scene. You embarrassed your sister. Now you are acting irrational." I did not flinch. I set the cardboard box on the hood of my car. "Move," I said. My voice was surprisingly calm, stripped of any emotional resonance. Cynthia crossed her arms. "You are not going anywhere. Where would you go? You have $60 in your checking account." I checked. "You have a car that barely runs. You have no degree, no skills, and no connections. The real world does not care about your hurt feelings. It will chew you up and spit you out." She was listing my vulnerabilities, weaponizing the very limitations she had engineered. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to feel dependent. "If you drive away tonight," Cynthia continued, her tone dropping an octave, becoming a lethal whisper, "you are dead to this family. Do you understand me? You will not be welcome in Harper's home. You will not see your niece or nephew. You will have nothing. You will not survive a week out there." She expected me to crumble. She expected the threat of isolation to bring me to my knees. For 4 years, I had feared losing my place in the family. I had feared being cast out. But standing in that dimly lit parking lot, looking at the woman who had stolen my future to secure her own comfort, the fear evaporated. The isolation she threatened was not a punishment. It was a release. I reached out and grabbed the cardboard box from the hood. I took a step toward her, I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I have been dead for 4 years, I said. Cynthia's expression cracked. A flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed her features. She saw the absolute emptiness in my eyes. The obedience was gone. The daughter she had molded into a servant was dead. And she did not know how to control the woman standing in front of her. I stepped around her, pulling the driver's side door open. I tossed the box onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. I turned the key. The engine coughed twice before catching. Settling into a rough idle, I shifted the car into reverse. Cynthia placed her hands on the driver's side window. Leaning in, "Riley, do not do this," she demanded. Her voice lost its practiced calm, edged with sudden panic. I did not roll down the window. I pressed my foot against the accelerator. Backing up, Cynthia was forced to step away, her manicured hands slipping from the glass. I swung the sedan around, the tires squealing softly against the asphalt. Maneuvering past the silver SUV that blocked my path, I shifted into drive and hit the gas. I looked in the rearview mirror. The red glow of my taillights illuminated Cynthia standing alone in the empty parking lot. Her perfectly styled hair was blowing frantically in the hot wind, her posture rigid and messy. She looked small, the matriarch of the flawless dynasty, left behind in a cloud of exhaust. I turned right onto the main avenue heading east. The gas gauge read 3/4 full. The GPS on my phone calculated the distance to New Haven, Connecticut. It would take 20 hours of straight driving. I had a 9-0, a tank of gas, and a water-damaged letter. It was a reckless, desperate plan. The logic of American society dictated that a woman with no resources and no safety net would fail. She would end up stranded at a truck stop, calling home for a wire transfer. Cynthia was banking on that logic. She believed poverty would break me faster than her gaslighting ever could. She expected me to hit a wall of reality and shatter. She did not understand that I was not driving toward a destination. I was driving toward a reckoning. I was heading straight into the heart of the institution that had originally chosen me, armed with nothing but the truth and a growing dangerous desperation. The real world might chew me up, but I was going to make sure it choked on the pieces. The highway lines blurred into a continuous gray ribbon. I drove for 20 hours straight, stopping only when my vision doubled or the gas gauge dropped below a quarter tank. I slept in cramped, fitful increments, curled in the back seat of my sedan at illuminated truck stops in Ohio and Pennsylvania. My diet consisted of stale peanut butter granola bars and bitter black coffee bought with loose change. Every time my eyelids drooped, the image of Cynthia calmly dabbing champagne off my forged future jolted me awake. The physical toll of the journey settled deep into my joints. My neck throbbed, my hands HD from gripping the steering wheel. I crossed the Connecticut state line on a Tuesday morning. The flat, sprawling grids of the Midwest faded from the rearview mirror. They were replaced by dense green trees, narrow, winding roads, and the heavy weight of centuries-old architecture. New Haven felt less like a city and more like a fortress. I navigated my battered car through the unfamiliar streets, parking at a metered spot 3 blocks from the main campus. I stepped out into the humid morning air. My clothes were wrinkled. I smelled of highway, sweat, and exhaustion. I walked toward the university, crossing the threshold of ornate stone archways and wrought iron gates. The architecture was imposing. Towering Gothic spires reached toward the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured courtyards. Students walked past me wearing tailored coats and carrying expensive leather satchels. They moved with the effortless confidence of people who knew they belonged. I felt like an intruder, a ghost haunting a life I was supposed to have started 4 years ago. Finding the admissions building took 20 minutes of navigating the sprawling campus. I pulled open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the lobby. The air conditioning was sharp and sterile. The walls were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, looking down from their gilded frames. I approached the front reception desk. A woman in a tailored gray suit sat behind a polished mahogany counter. She typed rapidly on a keyboard, her expression neutral and professional. She looked up as I stopped in front of her. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out the letter. The paper was dry now, but the champagne had left a pale, warped stain across the bottom half. The blue crest was permanently blurred, the ink feathering into the cream fibers. I slid the document across the cool mahogany wood. "I was admitted 4 years ago," I said. My voice was raspy from disuse and lack of sleep. My family intercepted this letter and hid it from me. "I just found it. I am here to claim my seat." The woman looked at the damaged paper, then up at me, her brow furrowed in sympathy. A soft human reaction breaking through her professional veneer. She picked up the letter by the corner, inspecting the date printed near the top margin. She let out a quiet sigh, setting it gently back down on the desk. "Miss Clark," she began, her tone gentle but unyielding. "This is a terrible situation. I truly am sorry for what you have experienced. However, offers of admission expire at the end of their respective academic cycles. We cannot honor a scholarship from 4 years ago. The cohort is full. The funding has been reallocated. You have to reapply through the standard applicant pool for the next fall semester." I stared at her. The righteous momentum that had fueled my 2-0-hour drive crashed into a wall of impenetrable bureaucracy. I did not need an apology. I needed my life back. I was accepted. I pressed, leaning closer to the counter, my fingers gripping the edge of the wood. I earned this scholarship. A crime was committed to keep me away. You cannot punish me for a theft I did not commit. The woman folded her hands, offering a placating smile that did not reach her eyes. "I understand your frustration," she replied. "But the university operates under strict legal and administrative guidelines. We have no mechanism to retroactively admit a student based on family disputes regardless of the severity. You must go through the formal channels." A few feet away, an administrative assistant was processing a stack of incoming mail. He held a heavy metal date stamp in his right hand. He pressed it into an ink pad, aligned it over a fresh document, and brought it down hard against the desk. Thud. The sound echoed through the sterile lobby. It was final. It was procedural. It was the sound of a system that did not care about my stolen youth, my cracked hands, or the truth. Thud. Another document processed. Another rigid rule followed. That mechanical noise amplified the dread pooling in my stomach. The truth was resting on the counter in front of me, stained and warped. But the truth was not enough. Institutions do not bend their foundational rules to accommodate personal tragedies. They require paperwork. They require protocol. They run on cold, hard data. I picked up the ruined letter and folded it back into my pocket. I turned away from the desk and walked out of the building. The morning sun glared off the stone pathways, blinding me for a second. My pulse pounded in my ears. I stood on the edge of the Ivy League campus, calculating the brutal math of my reality. I had less than $600 in my checking account. I had no job. I had no place to sleep tonight. I was over 1,000 miles away from the only home I had ever known. Locked out of my dream by an administrative technicality. Cynthia's warning echoed in my mind. She said the real world would chew me up. She banked on the cold indifference of systems like this to send me crawling back to Nebraska. If I reapplied through the standard pool, I would have to wait an entire year just for a decision. I could not survive a year in a transient state. I needed a way inside now. I walked toward the city streets, branching off from the campus. The raw anger that propelled me across the country sharpened into a calculated, desperate focus. If the front door was locked by bureaucratic rules, I needed to find a structural weakness in the wall. I needed to understand the mechanics of the institution well enough to force their hand. I needed a loophole. And to find a loophole, I needed to learn their language. The game had shifted from a family dispute to a legal strategy, and I was about to find out just how far I was willing to go to rewrite the rules. The first week in New Haven tested the limits of my endurance. The adrenaline that fueled my cross-country drive evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I slept in my car for 3 nights, waking up stiff and shivering in the damp Connecticut chill. I washed my face in public restroom sinks and ate cheap granola bars. I stretched my $600 with absolute precision, rationing every cent. Surrendering was not an option. Returning to Nebraska would validate Cynthia's prediction. It would mean resigning myself to a life of unpaid servitude. I needed income, and I needed it immediately. I secured a night shift job as a data entry clerk at a large regional hospital on the edge of the city. It paid minimum wage and required no references, just a pulse and the ability to type fast. I rented a tiny windowless room in a shared basement apartment from a landlord who asked no questions as long as I paid the first month in cash. The space barely fit a twin mattress and a peeling dresser. The air smelled of damp earth and old pipes. The contrast was brutal. By day, I walked the perimeter of an elite Ivy League campus, surrounded by towering Gothic spires and the promise of endless opportunity. By night, I retreated to a dark subterranean box, counting my remaining dollars and listening to the scurrying of unseen insects in the walls. My shift at the hospital ran from 11 at night until 7 inches the morning. I sat in a sterile, windowless records room, bathed in harsh artificial light. The rhythmic, hypnotic hum of the overhead fluorescent bulbs became the soundtrack to my new life. It was a low, steady vibration that matched the cadence of my fingers striking the keyboard. I transcribed patient intake forms, transferring messy handwriting into sterile digital records. It was mindless, grueling work. At 3 inches the morning, when the hospital corridors were quiet and my eyes burned from staring at the monitor, I stayed awake by plotting. Every keystroke was a step away from my mother's control. Every form I processed funded my survival. I was building a foundation from absolute zero. I refused to let the exhaustion consume my days. At 8 inches the morning, after my shift ended, and I managed 2 hours of fitful sleep on the basement mattress, I walked to the New Haven Free Public Library. The building was a sanctuary of quiet dignity, with high arched windows and long oak tables. It offered free internet and access to legal databases. I sat at a corner table for 5 hours a day, relentlessly researching university admissions policies, administrative bylaws, and the legal definition of fraud. The bureaucratic wall that had repelled me was built on rules. To dismantle it, I needed to master those rules. I sifted through hundreds of pages of dense legal jargon, taking meticulous notes in a cheap spiral notebook. I was searching for the loophole, the structural weakness that would force the admissions board to reopen my case. The text blurred before my tired eyes, filled with complex clauses and unfamiliar terminology. I was a logistics clerk playing lawyer, out of my depth, but fueled by a desperate, calculated rage. On the third afternoon of my library routine, I dropped a massive volume of Connecticut contract law onto my table with a frustrated thud. A young man sitting at the adjacent table looked up from his laptop. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a faded navy crew neck. His expression was sharp and assessing. He closed his laptop and walked over carrying a stack of index cards. "You have been staring at that contract law index for 3 days," he said, his voice quiet but direct. "You look like you are either trying to sue a landlord or write a very boring novel." I looked at him, too exhausted for polite small talk. "I am trying to understand the statute of limitations on fraudulent document submission within a private institution," I replied. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the specificity of my answer. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "I am Oliver," he said. "I am a second-year law student here, and I work part-time at the reference desk to pay off my student loans. The book you are holding is outdated by 6 years. You need the revised statutes on the 3rd floor. What exactly did someone submit on your behalf?" I hesitated. I had not spoken a word about my situation to anyone since I arrived in New Haven. The trauma of the past 4 years was a heavy private burden, but looking at Oliver, I saw a pragmatic, analytical mind. I saw someone who understood the mechanics of the system I was trying to break. I pulled the water-damaged jail letter from my bag and slid it across the oak table. He picked it up carefully, his eyes scanning the blurred blue crest and the date. I gave him the condensed version of my history. I explained the fake rejection portal, the 4 years of servitude, and the sudden discovery of the physical acceptance letter. I told him about the admissions officer who had turned me away based on the expiration of the offer. Oliver did not offer pity. He did not gasp or express horror. His reaction was entirely clinical, which was exactly what I needed. He tapped his pen against the table. "Rapid. Thoughtful rhythm. The admissions officer is technically correct regarding the expiration of a standard offer," Oliver explained, leaning forward. "But your situation is not a standard expiration. This is an issue of interference and potential fraud. We need to stop looking at university bylaws and start looking at federal privacy laws. We need to prove that you never formally declined the seat." He pulled my spiral notebook toward him and began sketching a diagram. He explained the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. He outlined the process of requesting archived admissions files. Oliver became my first true ally in a city where I had nothing. He taught me how to decode the legal jargon, translating dense statutes into actionable steps. He transformed my blind rage into a structured legal strategy. I was no longer just a victim reacting to a crime. I was a tactician preparing for war. But even with Oliver's guidance, I knew the path forward required more than just understanding the law. It required hard, irrefutable evidence. I needed to see exactly what Cynthia had sent to Yale 4 years ago. And I needed to pray that her arrogance had left a paper trail I could use to destroy her. The first 2 weeks in New Haven established a grueling rhythm. Hospital data entry by night, legal research in the library by day. The physical exhaustion was a constant hum in the background of my existence. A low-grade fever I learned to ignore. The distance between Connecticut and Nebraska felt vast, an ocean of asphalt and time zones. I thought the physical separation would grant me a reprieve from my mother's influence. I underestimated her reach and I underestimated her desperation. When an apex predator realizes its prey has escaped the enclosure, it does not mourn. It hunts. Cynthia launched her counteroffensive on a Thursday. I was sitting at my usual table in the public library, organizing notes on federal privacy laws, when my phone vibrated against the wood. It was a text message from my Aunt Linda. Linda rarely contacted me unless it involved coordinating a potluck side dish for a family holiday. The message was short and dripping with manufactured concern. "Riley, we are all so worried about you. Your mother told us about your psychotic break at the anniversary party. Please come home and get the psychiatric help you need. We love you." I stared at the screen. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking, yet entirely predictable. Cynthia was a master of narrative control. She could not admit to the extended family that she had stolen my Ivy League acceptance letter. Doing so would shatter her image as the benevolent, flawless matriarch. Instead, she flipped the script. She transformed my righteous departure into an episode of mental instability. I was no longer a victim seeking justice. I was a hysterical, ungrateful daughter experiencing a psychological crisis. The smear campaign was efficient, ruthless, and designed to isolate me completely. 5 minutes later, I walked 3 blocks to a convenience store to buy a cup of black coffee and a protein bar before my hospital shift. I handed the cashier my debit card. He swiped it. The machine beeped. A sharp, flat tone of rejection. Declined. He tried again. Declined. I checked my banking app while standing at the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. The account balance displayed 0. I toggled to the transaction history. There were no recent purchases. The funds had not been spent. They were frozen. An administrative hold had been placed on the account, pending review by a secondary authorized user. I closed my eyes, resting my forehead against the cool glass of the convenience store door. The joint checking account. When I was 16 and got my first summer job sweeping hair at a local salon, Cynthia insisted on setting up a joint student checking account. It was framed as a lesson in financial responsibility. She was listed as a custodial signer. I had never bothered to open a new independent account because I never had enough money to warrant the effort. The meager paychecks from the logistics firm and the erratic $20 bills Harper tossed me for gas had all funneled into that same account for nearly a decade. Cynthia had triggered a security freeze. She weaponized an old banking loophole to trap my remaining $300. It was a deliberate, calculated move to starve me out. She knew I had left with almost nothing. By freezing my only liquid assets, she was cutting the oxygen line. She expected the reality of poverty to break my resolve. She expected the humiliation of a declined debit card to force me to crawl back to Nebraska, begging for access to my own money. I walked back to my basement apartment in the fading evening light, my stomach rumbling, my hands empty. I sat on the edge of the twin mattress and opened a cheap cup of instant ramen. Softening the noodles with lukewarm tap water from the bathroom sink, the room was silent, except for the erratic dripping of a leaky pipe behind the drywall. My phone vibrated again. A voicemail notification icon appeared on the screen. The caller ID read Harper. I set the cup of ramen down and tapped the screen. Holding the phone away from my ear, the audio crackled, filling the small, dark room with the sounds of my sister's chaotic life. Relay. This is ridiculous. Harper began, her voice tight with condescension and rising panic. Mom is absolutely devastated. You ruined our anniversary party, and now you are playing this dramatic runaway game. In the background of the audio, the sharp, aggressive voice of Ryan bled through the microphone. I am not paying $3,000 a month for a professional nanny. Harper, tell her to get back here. We have a routine. This is unacceptable. Harper's voice returned to the foreground, urgent and pleading. Do you hear him? You are destroying my marriage over a piece of paper from 4 years ago. You could not have afforded that school anyway. Just come home and stop this tantrum. Mom is willing to unfreeze your account if you just apologize and come back. We need you. The voicemail clicked off. I sat very still. The lukewarm noodles tasted like cardboard, but I ate them anyway, methodically fueling my body. The financial starvation tactic was supposed to break me. The smear campaign was supposed to shame me into submission. The frantic voicemail from my golden sister was designed to manipulate my lingering sense of duty. Instead, the combination of these attacks had the opposite effect, Cynthia and Harper did not realize they had just handed me the psychological freedom I needed by freezing my account and framing my departure as a psychotic break. Cynthia proved that she was not operating from a place of maternal concern. She was operating from a place of pure control by complaining about the cost of a professional nanny while my life was in free fall. Ryan and Harper proved that they viewed me solely as a subsidized domestic asset. The voicemail confirmed what I already knew. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was an appliance. They expected to plug back into the wall. I finished the ramen and tossed the empty styrofoam cup into a trash bag. The despair that Cynthia hoped to induce never materialized. The hunger in my stomach sharpened into a lethal, focused energy. They wanted to play a game of attrition. They thought holding $300 hostage would force my surrender. I looked at my spiral notebook resting on the peeling dresser filled with Oliver's diagrams regarding federal privacy laws and academic fraud statutes. The financial starvation did not break me. It liberated me. It severed the final thread of hesitation. I no longer just wanted my seat at Yale. I wanted to completely dismantle the false reality my family had built on my back. I was going to tear down the colonial house of cards brick by brick. And I was going to use their own arrogance to do it. The war had escalated from a fight for a scholarship to a fight for total annihilation, and they had no idea what was coming for them. The process of waiting for the federal government to mandate compliance takes exactly 42 days. 42 days of surviving on hospital cafeteria scraps and tap water. Without access to my frozen checking account, I relied entirely on the paper paychecks from the night shift. I cashed them at a local storefront that took a predatory fee, but it kept the lights on in my basement room. I did not complain. Hunger is an excellent focusing agent. It strips away distractions. I spent every spare waking hour sitting across from Oliver at the New Haven Public Library, preparing for the documents to arrive. Oliver never pied me. He was a product of the foster care system before fighting his way into law school on academic merit alone, meaning he understood the anatomy of a rigged game. He treated my case like a clinical trial. He forced me to memorize the statutes governing the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. He made me practice the legal terminology until the words felt natural in my mouth. We built a timeline of my senior year, mapping every conversation, every signed document, and every keystroke I could remember from that spring. We laid the groundwork. We just needed the ammunition. The ammunition arrived on a Tuesday. I was walking down the concrete steps to my basement apartment when I saw the thick manila envelope resting against my door. The return address belonged to the Yale University Office of Undergraduate Admissions Records Department. The package was heavy. It contained the entirety of my archived applicant profile, released under federal mandate. I did not open it in the basement. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the sterile, undeniable light of the library. I carried the envelope across town, clutching it to my chest like a shield. The autumn air had turned sharp, biting through my thin jacket, but I barely registered the cold. I found Oliver at his usual table on the third floor. He saw the package in my hands and immediately closed his laptop. He pushed his textbooks aside, clearing a large, flat space on the oak table. He did not say a word. He simply handed me a stainless steel letter opener. He slid the blade under the flap. The thick paper tore with a satisfying ripping sound. I tipped the envelope upside down. A stack of documents, perhaps 200 pages thick, slid out and landed on the wood. This was the paper trail of my stolen life. We divided the stack into two piles. We sifted through the standard application materials first. My high school transcripts, my standardized test scores, the letters of recommendation from my biology and history teachers, praising a work ethic I had almost forgotten I possessed. I saw the original carbon copy of the acceptance letter, identical to the water-damaged version currently sitting in my pocket. Seeing the pristine copy felt like looking at a ghost. It proved the institution had wanted me. It proved the offer was real. Then we reached the post-admission correspondence file. Oliver stopped turning pages. His hand hovered over a document near the bottom of the stack. His posture went rigid. He did not speak. He just slid the piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a formal response form. The header displayed the university crest. The text was boilerplate administrative language, providing the applicant an opportunity to formally accept or decline the offer of admission. The box next to the phrase, "I declined the offer of admission," was checked with a sharp, decisive slash of blue ink. At the bottom of the page on the line designated for the applicant's signature sat my name, Riley Clark, written in that same bright blue ink. The date next to it was April 14th, the exact day my mother had stood behind my chair and watched me cry over a fake rejection screen. Cynthia had not merely intercepted the mail. She had not simply hidden a piece of paper in a dresser drawer. Hiding the letter was a betrayal. Forging my signature to officially terminate my candidacy was a federal crime. She had impersonated me to sever my tie to the university, ensuring the institution would never follow up, never call, and never ask why their scholarship recipient failed to register for classes. I stared at the blue ink. My vision narrowed until the rest of the library faded away. I studied the curves and slants of the cursive writing. "That is not my signature," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, echoing in the quiet research hall. "I write my name in print. I never connect the letters." Oliver leaned closer. Adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, he pulled a small magnifying glass from his bag, a tool he used for reading the fine print on old microfiche records. He hovered the lens over the blue ink. "Look at the first letter," Oliver said, his voice dropping to a low clinical register. "Look at the capital R." I leaned in. The stark contrast of the bright blue ink against the sterile black and white university document made the forgery jump off the page. The letter R was distinct. It did not start with a straight vertical line. It began with an exaggerated, elongated loop that swooped down below the baseline before curving back up into the crest of the letter. It was a flamboyant, archaic style of cursive. My stomach plummeted. A visceral memory surfaced. Vivid and undeniable, I saw a yellow legal pad resting on the kitchen island in Nebraska. I saw a grocery list written in blue ink. Roast beef, radishes, rice. Every single word beginning with that exact letter started with the same sweeping, elongated, guilty loop. Cynthia wrote her grocery lists, her holiday cards, and her checks with that identical, distinctive flourish. She was so confident in her control, so arrogant in her execution, that she had not even bothered to disguise her handwriting. She signed away my future using the same pen stroke she used to buy milk. She forged it, I said. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. Oliver leaned back in his chair. He picked up his pen and tapped it against his notebook. "Hiding mail is a family dispute," he stated, his analytical mind processing the data. Forging a signature on a federally mandated educational document to decline a funded scholarship crosses the line into criminal fraud. This changes the entire board. We are no longer asking the admissions office for a favor. We are presenting them with a crime scene. The revelation sent a shockwave through my nervous system. Cynthia had always maintained an aura of invincibility. She operated under the assumption that the domestic sphere shielded her from real-world consequences. She thought keeping the abuse within the walls of the colonial house made it invisible to the law. She was wrong. She had left her fingerprints on a document housed in a federal archive. She had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her pristine public image. I reached out to pick up the forged declination letter, ready to place it in a separate protective folder. But as I lifted the page, the friction pulled up the document, resting immediately beneath it. They had been stapled together at some point. The top left corners bearing the matched puncture wounds of heavy-duty metal staples. I looked at the second sheet of paper. It was not a university form. It bore the header of a private community-sponsored educational foundation. It was a redirect authorization form for a merit grant I had won during my senior year of high school. A grant designated for young women pursuing degrees in science and technology. Oliver saw the form at the same time. He reached out and stopped my hand. His eyes scanning the dense financial text. He read the routing numbers printed near the bottom margin. The atmosphere at the oak table shifted from vindication to something much darker. Cynthia had not just forged my name to keep me home. She had signed my name to steal something else. And the paper trail was about to lead us straight into the foundation of my sister's perfect life. The second sheet of paper rested on the scarred oak table of the library. Bearing a logo I had not seen since high school, it was the crest of the Nebraska Coalition for Women in Science and Technology. During my senior year, my biology teacher had nominated me for their Regional Merit Award. I remembered attending a modest banquet in a hotel ballroom, shaking hands with local dignitaries, and receiving a framed certificate. I had assumed the award was purely ceremonial, a nice line item to add to a resume. I never saw a monetary figure. I never saw a check. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the dense financial text beneath the coalition header. The document was a disbursement authorization form. It detailed a liquid grant awarded to the recipient for educational advancement. The amount was printed in bold black ink near the center of the page. 25美元. Ling, ling, ling. My breath caught in my throat. The sum was staggering. To an 18-year-old girl working for tips and minimum wage, it was a fortune. To a woman surviving on hospital cafeteria, food, and sleeping in a damp basement, it was a lifeline that had been severed before I even knew it existed. At the bottom of the form sat a redirect authorization clause, allowing the funds to be deposited into an alternate account rather than being sent directly to a university bursar. Below that clause was a signature line. My name was written there endorsing the transfer. The ink was the same bright blue as the fake Yale declination. The capital letters started with the same sweeping, elongated guilty loop. Cynthia had forged my endorsement. She had stolen $520,000 of my hard-earned merit money and diverted it into the custodial joint checking account. The very same account she had frozen 2 days ago to starve me out. Oliver did not offer empty words of comfort. His foster care background had taught him that sympathy was useless when navigating corrupt systems. Action was the only currency that mattered. He pulled his laptop closer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We have the forgery," Oliver said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. "But fraud is a story. To make it a conviction, we need to show where the money went. Your mother did not leave $25,000, sitting in a joint checking account for 4 years. She moved it. Because your name is legally on that frozen account, you have the right to request the historical transaction logs." The next morning, as soon as the sun rose and the hospital data entry shift ended, I did not go back to the basement to sleep. I walked straight to a local branch of the National Bank that held my frozen account. I sat in a sterile cubicle across from a branch manager. I handed over my driver's license and requested the archived statements from April and May of my high school senior year. The manager printed the records, handing me a thin stack of warm paper. I carried the statements back to the library. Oliver was already waiting at our table. I laid the papers flat. We traced the columns of numbers. There it was. On April 18th, 4 days after the Yale declination was forged, a deposit of $25,000 cleared the account. The ledger designated it as an external wire transfer from the Science Coalition. We followed the balance down the page. The money sat untouched for exactly 14 days. On May 2nd, a single withdrawal emptied the entire sum. The transaction type was listed as a certified cashier's check. Oliver rubbed his chin, his analytical mind assembling the puzzle pieces. Cynthia cashed it out. He murmured, "What was happening in your family during the first week of May 4 years ago? Think hard. Did anyone buy a car? Did anyone take a luxury vacation?" I closed my eyes. The memories of that spring were clouded by the trauma of the fake college rejection. But I forced myself to dig through the fog. May the weather was turning warm. Harper and Ryan were newly married. They had been living in a cramped apartment downtown. Then suddenly they invited the family over for a celebration. They bought the house. I whispered. My eyes snapped open, meeting Oliver's gaze. Harper and Ryan bought the 5-bedroom colonial. They closed on it the first week of May. Oliver immediately opened a new tab on his browser, navigating to the county property appraiser's public database. Property deeds are public record. He typed in Ryan's last name and the county zip code. The system generated a PDF of the property transfer. The closing date on the colonial was May 4th. The timeline was a flawless match. But Oliver required concrete proof. A matching timeline is circumstantial, he stated. Scrolling through the property records, we need the specific financial artery that connects your stolen grant to their front door. We need the routing number. We turned back to the bank documents. I dug through a secondary envelope the bank manager had provided, which contained the archived tax forms associated with the joint account. I pulled out a perfectly preserved 1099 tax form. It had been generated to report the fractional interest earned during the brief 4-day period. The $25,000 sat in escrow printed clearly in the designated payer identification box was the exact routing number of Ryan and Harper's joint mortgage account. Cynthia had ordered the cashier's check directly through the mortgage lender's verified portal. The sequence of 9 digits on the tax form matched the withdrawal record flawlessly. The paper trail was closed. The proof was irrefutable. The realization snapped shut around me like a steel trap. The physical environment of the New Haven library faded into white noise. I was transported back to the sprawling suburban house in Nebraska. The symbolism of my past 4 years rearranged itself into a mosaic of profound psychological horror. I thought about the imported Italian tile in Harper's kitchen. I had spent countless hours on my hands and knees scrubbing wine stains and mud out of the grout until my knuckles bled. I thought about the heavy oak front door I unlocked every afternoon to bring my niece and nephew inside. I thought about the pastel yellow paint I had rolled onto the walls of the nursery, breathing in the fumes so Harper would not have to exert herself during her pregnancy. I had not just maintained that house. I bought it, my intellect, my late night studying advanced biology, my essays, and my merit grant had funded the down payment for their pristine suburban kingdom. Ryan walked around that house projecting the smug superiority of a successful provider, unaware or uncaring that the roof over his head was paid for by the quiet sister. He refused to look in the eye. Harper tossed me $20 bills for gas money, treating me like a charity case, while she slept in a master bedroom financed by my stolen youth. I was an indentured servant forced to maintain a castle I had secretly purchased. The humiliation gave way to a cold, calculating fury. I was no longer just the victim of a stolen education. I was the victim of grand larceny, identity theft, and severe financial fraud. Cynthia had orchestrated a systemic extraction of my resources to prop up her golden child. I stood up from the oak table, pushing my chair back. The exhaustion of the night shifts vanished. I walked out of the library and headed to a local office supply store. I bought a heavy-duty black binder, a box of clear plastic protective sleeves, and a set of numbered tab dividers. I returned to the library and began to build my weapon. Page by page, I assembled the dossier. Section 1 contained the original Yale acceptance letter and the forged declination form, highlighting the elongated cursive forgery. Section 2 held the STEM grant award notification and the forged redirect authorization. Section 3 documented the bank statements, the 1,099 tax form, and the public property deed for the colonial house. I drafted a chronological summary of events, typing with the speed and precision I had honed during endless nights at the hospital data entry terminal. When I finished, the dossier was Karen's 6-page long. It was a flawless, airtight, devastating piece of forensic accounting. It left no room for interpretation. It left no room for mercy. I slipped the final page into its plastic sleeve and closed the black binder. The metal rings snapped shut with a sharp metallic bite. Oliver watched me, his expression reflecting a quiet, profound respect. The structural weakness in the institutional wall had been found. It was time to stop dealing with front desk clerks and administrative assistants. I picked up the heavy binder, feeling the physical weight of my stolen years resting in my hands. I was ready to walk back onto the Ivy League campus. And this time, I was going straight to the top. The mahogany doors of the Yale Undergraduate Admissions Review Boardroom were heavy enough to require 2 hands to push open. The air inside smelled of lemon oil polish, old paper, and institutional authority. It was a space engineered to intimidate. Portraits of historical academics stared down from wood-paneled walls. A massive, gleaming conference table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Sitting at the head of that table was Dr. Evelyn Sterling. She was a woman in her early 60s, possessing the sharp, unyielding posture of an executive who had spent decades guarding the gates of an elite institution. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe knot, and wire-rimmed reading glasses rested on the bridge of her nose, connected to a delicate silver chain. 2 other board members sat flanking her, their expressions neutral and tired. I walked toward the empty chair, positioned at the opposite end of the long table. My canvas tote bag felt heavy against my shoulder. My clothes were neat but visibly worn, bought on clearance in a state thousands of miles away. The contrast between my presence and the wealth of the room was stark. A few weeks ago, that disparity would have made me want to shrink into the floorboards. Today, I pulled out the leather chair and sat down with my spine perfectly straight. I did not feel small. I felt armed. Dr. Sterling folded her hands over a pristine legal pad. "Miss Clark," she began, her voice crisp and echoing slightly against the hardwood floors. "We received your request for an emergency hearing. You claim to have uncovered new evidence regarding your admission status from 4 academic cycles ago. The floor is yours." I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy-duty black binder. I placed it on the polished mahogany. I pushed it firmly across the long table. It slid with a low scraping sound, stopping directly in front of Dr. Sterling. "That is my life," I stated. My voice was steady, stripped of any emotional tremor. Every document, every timeline, and every forgery keeping me out of this university is in that dossier. Dr. Sterling opened the binder. The metal rings gleamed under the recessed lighting. For the next 15 minutes, the only sounds in the boardroom were the turning of plastic sleeves and the quiet breathing of the administrators. She examined the original water-damaged acceptance letter. She turned to the archived declination form, retrieved from their own federal files. She spent a long time studying the blue ink. She retrieved a small magnifying lens from her desk drawer, hovering it over the elongated, sweeping loop of the capital letter in the forged signature. The tension in the room thickened. I watched her process the visual proof. I waited for the realization to hit her. expecting her to look up with immediate outrage on my behalf. Instead, Dr. Sterling sat back in her high leather chair. She closed the black binder. She let out a long, measured sigh. The sound was not righteous anger. It was administrative fatigue. "Miss Clark," Dr. Sterling said, her tone laced with a practiced, sterile sympathy. "This signature is highly suspicious. I grant you that the stylistic differences between this document and your standardized testing signatures are notable. However, suspicious is not a legal standard." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, but I kept my face blank. The university cannot legally prove who executed this forgery. She continued, "Anyone could have checked that box and signed your name. A jealous peer, a disgruntled teacher, a family member. We operate under strict liability frameworks. We cannot reinstate a 4-year-old fully funded scholarship based on domestic hearsay without concrete proof, linking a specific perpetrator to the act of defrauding this institution. Our hands are tied. The declination must stand." It was the ultimate bureaucratic red herring. They acknowledged the crime, but refused to act because identifying the criminal fell outside their jurisdiction. They expected me to lower my head, accept the technicality, and walk away defeated. They assumed the limits of my evidence stopped at the edge of their campus. I did not blink. I did not beg. I simply reached back into my canvas bag. "I understand your need for concrete liability, Dr. Sterling," I replied. I pulled out a single manila folder distinct from the black binder. "Which is why I am not asking you to rely on hearsay. I am asking you to follow the money." I opened the folder and extracted a stack of certified financial documents. I stood up, walked the length of the mahogany table, and laid the papers directly in front of her. "You are looking at a forged declination form dated April 14th, I explained, pointing to the closed binder. "On that exact same day, a lam 000 merit grant awarded to me by a private STEM coalition was fraudulently redirected into a custodial checking account. The endorsement signature on that grant check matches the forged signature on your university document flawlessly. The same bright blue ink, the same sweeping loop." The two flanking board members leaned forward, their neutral expressions breaking into genuine curiosity. "Dr. Sterling looked down at the bank statements I had just provided. I tapped the second page. Exactly 14 days later, that stolen grant money was withdrawn via a certified cashier's check. Now look at the final document. It is a notarized copy of a property deed for a 5-bedroom home in Nebraska, purchased by my sister and her husband Ryan. Attached to it is the 1,099 tax form generated by that brief escrow period. I placed my index finger on the 9-digit routing number printed on the tax form. The stolen funds were deposited directly into their joint mortgage account. I stated, my voice echoing with lethal precision. "My mother did not just forge my signature to decline your offer of admission. She forged it to steal a federal grant and launder the cash into real estate for her golden child. The person who signed your declination form is the exact same person who committed grand larceny. The financial timelines are permanently linked. This is not a family dispute. This is a documented, verifiable financial crime involving identity theft, and your institution is holding the primary piece of forensic evidence." The boardroom fell dead silent. The suffocating quiet stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background. "Dr. Sterling stopped looking at the papers. She stared at the routing numbers. Her sharp executive posture softened into profound shock. She reached up to her face. She slowly pulled her wire, rimmed reading glasses down the bridge of her nose. The frame slipped free. The delicate silver chain attached to the earpieces dropped. hitting the polished mahogany desk. Clink. The sharp metallic noise punctuated the revelation. The institutional wall had not just cracked, it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. I had backed an Ivy League university into a corner, using their own demand for undeniable data. They were no longer dealing with a sad story about a controlling mother. They were looking at a major liability involving stolen funds. Doctor. Sterling looked up at me. The bureaucratic fatigue was gone, replaced by a calculating acclamars. Intense respect. We will need our legal department to verify these routing numbers immediately, she said, her voice dropping to a serious hushed tone. If this financial link holds, the board will convene a special session by tomorrow morning. I nodded once, gathered my empty manila folder, and walked out of the heavy oak doors. The academic victory was imminent. I could feel the tectonic plates of my future shifting back into their rightful place. But securing my seat in New Haven was only half the war. The house bought with my stolen intellect was still standing pristine in the Midwest. My brother-in-law, a man obsessed with his own professional reputation, was currently sleeping under a roof financed by felony fraud. It was time to send the blast wave back to Nebraska. The waiting period following the board hearing required a different kind of endurance. I returned to my basement apartment in New Haven and my night shifts at the hospital. The adrenaline of the confrontation with Dr. Sterling faded, replaced by a calculated, deliberate patience. I had presented an undeniable case to the university. Now I needed to orchestrate the demolition of the false reality. Back in Nebraska, Cynthia believed she controlled the narrative. She had frozen my checking account and smeared my reputation among the extended family. Confident that physical distance rendered me powerless, she assumed I lacked the resources and the strategic vision to launch a counteroffensive. She was about to discover the lethal efficiency of a woman who had spent 4 years silently observing the vulnerabilities of her captors. I did not call my mother to scream. I did not text my sister to demand an apology. Engaging with them emotionally would only validate their illusion of control. Instead, I went to a local print shop and reproduced the entire 4-6-page dossier. I bound it in professional black leather. I placed it inside a heavy cardboard mailer, addressed it to Ryan's corporate law firm in downtown Omaha, and paid for overnight certified delivery. I bypassed Cynthia and Harper entirely. I aimed the strike directly at the foundation of the golden child's marriage. Ryan was a junior partner at a prestigious firm that handled lucrative corporate mergers. He wore custom suits, drove a luxury SUV, and obsessed over his public image. He viewed himself as a pillar of legal and moral authority within our community. He treated me with dismissive arrogance because I was merely the unpaid domestic help. I knew Ryan did not love Harper with any profound depth. He loved the pristine, curated lifestyle she provided. He loved the sprawling 5-bedroom colonial. He loved the illusion of perfection. I knew that Ryan's obsession with legality and reputation was his primary vulnerability. If he discovered that his perfect life was built on a foundation of federal fraud, his instinct for self-preservation would override his loyalty to his wife and his mother-in-law. The certified package arrived on his heavy mahogany desk on a Thursday morning. I tracked the delivery status on my phone while sitting in the hospital break room, signed for at 9:14 a.m. I imagined him slicing open the cardboard mailer with a silver letter opener. I pictured him opening the black binder, expecting a tedious legal brief, only to find the forged declination form, the redirected grant authorization, and the bank statements outlining the theft of $25. Ling, ling, ling. I imagined his blood running cold as he turned to the final page, reading the property deed for his own home, permanently linked to the stolen funds via the 1099 tax form. Ryan was an attorney. He understood the legal implications of the dossier with immediate, terrifying clarity. His house was purchased with fraudulently obtained federal money. Cynthia had committed grand larceny and identity theft. By living in that house and benefiting from the stolen funds, Ryan was positioned as an unwitting accessory after the fact. If the scandal became public, his career would be destroyed. He could face disbarment. I did not have to wait long for the blast wave to hit. At 4:30 that afternoon, my phone vibrated against the peeling laminate of my basement dresser. The caller ID displayed Harper's name. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then a third time, I let the calls ring out into the damp silence of my room. I waited an hour before tapping the voicemail icon. I wanted the panic to steep. The audio file began with a sharp, ragged intake of breath. "Riley, pick up the phone." Harper sobbed. Her voice was unrecognizable. Stripped of its usual condescension, the polished golden child veneer had been completely obliterated. "What did you send him? What did you do?" In the background of the audio, the chaotic sounds of a household tearing itself apart bled through the microphone. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps pacing across the imported Italian tile. I heard Ryan's voice, not smooth and confident, but elevated and aggressive. "I am not going down for this," Ryan shouted. His words were distinct, cutting through Harper's hysteria. She forged federal documents. "We bought this house with stolen money. I am calling my partners. I am calling the police before they come looking for me." Harper's voice returned to the foreground, desperate and pleading. "Please, Ryan. She is my mother. We can fix this. We can pay her back." A sharp, violent zip echoed through the phone speaker. It was the sound of a heavy brass zipper closing a thick leather suitcase. The aggressive final noise punctuated the collapse of their marriage. "You cannot pay back fraud," Ryan yelled. The suitcase thumped against the floorboards. "I am leaving. Do not call my office." The front door slammed, the noise vibrating through the voicemail recording. Harper dissolved into a fit of raw, uncontrollable weeping. The recording clicked off. I sat on the edge of my twin mattress and listened to the silence of my room. I did not feel a rush of triumphant joy. I felt the cold, heavy satisfaction of a structural collapse. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply handed them a mirror and let the reflection do the work. Cynthia's carefully constructed matriarchy shattered from the inside out in a matter of hours. The golden child's perfect marriage imploded because the foundation was built on a lie. Ryan turned on them to save himself, exactly as I had calculated. The illusion of the flawless suburban dynasty was gone, replaced by the reality of criminal liability and a broken home. I had neutralized the threat in Nebraska without ever raising my voice or boarding a plane. The physical distance that Cynthia thought would isolate me had allowed me to execute a clean, remote demolition, but the victory felt incomplete. Destroying the false reality was only a tactical necessity. The ultimate goal was reclaiming the future they had stolen. I set my phone down and looked toward the small grated window near the ceiling. The Nebraska problem was handled. Now I needed to know if Yale was going to open its doors. The silence following the collapse of Harper's marriage lasted exactly 7 days. I spent that week walking a tightrope of anticipation. I continued my night shifts at the hospital, typing patient data, while my mind calculated the odds of Yale's legal department validating my claims. The evidence was bulletproof, but institutions are notoriously risk-averse. They prefer to protect their own endowments rather than rectify the historical injustices of their applicants. I had forced their hand with the financial link, but I knew the final decision rested entirely on their internal liability calculus. On the 8th morning, I received a short formal email from the Office of Undergraduate Admissions. It requested my presence in Dr. Sterling's boardroom at 2 inches the afternoon. I arrived 10 minutes early. I wore the same clearance rack outfit I had worn the previous week. But this time, the canvas tote bag over my shoulder felt light. I did not bring the black binder. I had surrendered my ammunition. Now, I was just waiting for the verdict. I was escorted into the mahogany-paneled room. Doctor. Sterling was not flanked by the other board members this time. She sat alone at the head of the massive table. Her posture was relaxed. A stark departure from the severe guarded executive I had faced before. A single manila folder rested on the polished wood in front of her. "Have a seat." "Miss Clark," she said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite her. I sat down, keeping my hands folded in my lap. I willed my heart rate to steady. Our internal legal counsel has spent the past week reviewing the financial documents you provided. Doctor, Sterling began, her voice devoid of bureaucratic preamble. They cross-referenced the routing numbers on the 1099 tax form with the public property deeds in Douglas County, Nebraska. Furthermore, we verified the active status of the police report you filed regarding the identity theft and forgery. She paused, steepling her fingers. The silence stretched thin and fragile. The university's position on fraud is unequivocal. She continued, "We cannot, in good conscience or legal standing, honor a declination of admission that was executed through verified criminal means." Doctor. Sterling opened the manila folder. The air conditioning hummed. The only sound in the vast room, the Undergraduate Admissions Review Board convened in a special session yesterday evening. She stated, her gaze locking onto mine. "We voted unanimously to void the declination document dated April 14th from 4 academic cycles ago. The breath I had been holding for 460 days left my lungs in a quiet, ragged exhale. The institutional wall had not just cracked, it had crumbled into dust. The technicality that had locked me out was officially erased. Your original offer of admission is fully reinstated, effective for the upcoming fall semester," she announced. The words washed over me, carrying the profound weight of validation. I had not aimed too high. The universe had not corrected my course. The institution had wanted me then, and they were claiming me now. But Dr. Sterling was not finished. Furthermore, Miss Clark, we recognize the exceptional and severe nature of the financial abuse you endured to arrive in this room. You are now legally classified by this institution as an independent student, severed from any expected family contribution because your original merit grant was stolen. The financial aid office has adjusted your scholarship package. She slid a document out of the folder and pushed it across the mahogany table. Your tuition is covered in full. Room and board are covered in full. You will also receive a retroactive living stipend to ensure you have the resources necessary to focus entirely on your academics, she explained. I looked down at the paper resting in front of me. It was not a printout. It was a formal letterhead. The paper was crisp, thick, and flawless. The Yale University crest was embossed at the top in dark, pristine blue ink. It was a new acceptance letter. I reached out and touched it. The texture of the heavy cream paper was starkly different from the warped, water-damaged artifact sitting in my pocket. There were no champagne stains. There were no sharp creases where a mother had folded it to hide it in the dark. It was clean. It was untouched by Cynthia's sabotage. It was mine. You belong here. Miss Clark, Dr. Sterling said. Her voice carried a quiet, fierce respect. And this time, nobody is taking it from me. I traced the raised seal with my index finger. The victory was absolute. I had crossed the country with $60. fought a predatory family dynamic, and dismantled an Ivy League bureaucracy using their own rules. I had secured my future and ensured I would never scrub another suburban floor for the rest of my life. I looked up at Dr. Sterling and simply nodded. The gratitude was too profound for words, and she seemed to understand that. I walked out of the admissions building and onto the sunlit campus. The Gothic architecture no longer felt intimidating. It felt like home. The students rushing past me with their expensive satchels were no longer a reminder of what I lacked. They were my future peers. The brutal night shifts at the hospital were over. The windowless basement room was temporary. I had won. But as I walked toward the city streets, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID displayed an unknown Connecticut number. I swiped to answer. Riley. The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless, and instantly recognizable. The polished veneer was completely gone, replaced by a raw, unhinged desperation. It was Cynthia. "I'm outside the hospital," she cried, the sound of heavy rain hitting a car roof, audible in the background. "I flew in this morning. You need to come here right now. We have to talk. You have to stop this." The victory lap was suspended. The final confrontation was no longer a remote demolition. The architect of my stolen youth had crossed the country, desperate to contain the fallout of her collapsing kingdom. The tactical strike on Ryan had driven her out of the shadows, and now the puppeteer was standing in the rain, waiting for the puppet she could no longer control. The sky over New Haven broke open just after sunset. It was not a gentle autumn rain. It was a torrential downpour, washing the city streets in cold, driving sheets of water. I walked toward the hospital for my final night shift. I did not intend to log into the database tonight. I was only going to hand my identification badge to the shift supervisor and walk away from the basement life forever. I held a large black umbrella, the steady drumming of the rain against the nylon forming a shield between me and the storm. The hospital parking lot was a bleak expanse of cracked asphalt, illuminated by the harsh red glow of the emergency room neon sign. As I approached the main entrance, a silver rental sedan swerved into the loading zone. The tires hissed against the flooded pavement. The driver's side door flew open before the vehicle even shifted into park. A woman stepped out into the deluge. For a fraction of a second, I did not recognize her. The woman who stood in the Nebraska Colonial always looked like a photograph clipped from a luxury lifestyle magazine. Her hair was always sprayed into perfect submission. Her emerald dresses were tailored to the millimeter. The figure standing in the hospital parking lot was unraveling. Her beige designer trench coat was instantly soaked, clinging heavily to her frame. Her hair hung in bent, jagged strands across her face. It was Cynthia. She took a step toward me and stepped directly into a deep depression in the asphalt. The pothole was filled with cold rain mixed with iridescent motor oil. Her expensive Italian leather shoes sank below the murky surface. The delicate calf skin soaked up the toxic puddle, instantly ruining the expensive footwear. She did not even seem to notice. The matriarch who used to berate Harper for scuffing the hardwood floors was standing ankle-deep in parking lot sludge. The physical destruction of her pristine facade was jarringly a direct mirror of her collapsing life back home. "Riley," she gasped. She stumbled forward, stopping just outside the protective dome of my umbrella. The rain battered her face, washing away her expensive makeup in dark, muddy streaks. I stopped walking. I gripped the curved wooden handle of my umbrella. I did not step forward to share the shelter. I watched the cold water run down her designer coat. "I have been calling you for 2 days," Cynthia cried. Her voice lacked the smooth, practiced cadence she used during anniversary toasts and neighborhood association meetings. It was shrill, desperate, and entirely unhinged. You blocked my number. I had to hire a private investigator just to find this address. Do you have any idea what is happening right now? I looked at her, maintaining a steady clinical gaze. I imagine Ryan received my package. I replied. My tone was flat, devoid of anger or empathy. Cynthia let out a ragged sob, wrapping her arms around her own torso, as if trying to hold herself together. Ryan is gone, she wailed. He packed a bag and left Harper the same day your documents arrived. He told the managing partners at his law firm that he is filing for divorce. But that is not even the worst part. He went to the local precinct. He handed them your binder to protect his own career. She took another step closer, the oily water splashing against her ruined shoes. Detectives came to my house yesterday morning. Riley. They had a warrant for my bank records. The state prosecutor is opening a formal criminal investigation into the grant money. They are talking about federal wire fraud because the funds crossed state lines when they hit the mortgage account. They are talking about prison time. She reached out, hair wet, shaking fingers grasping the edge of my umbrella. You have to call the police department in Nebraska. She pleaded. You have to tell them you gave me permission to sign that declination form. Tell them the grant money was a gift to help your sister buy her house. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. If the victim recants, they will drop the charges. I stared at the trembling hand gripping my umbrella. For my entire life, this woman had manipulated my reality. She had used guilt as a tether, pulling me back into submission whenever I showed a spark of independence. She engineered an environment where I believed my only value was serving her golden child. She had stolen 4 years of my youth and $25, 000 of my hard-earned merit money. And now facing the lethal consequences of her own arrogance. She expected me to fall back into line. She expected the quiet, dependable daughter to absorb the punishment for her crimes. I am not dropping the report, I said. Cynthia's eyes widened in horror. The rain plastered her hair against her cheeks. You cannot do this. She screamed over the sound of the downpour. I am your mother. I raised you. I put a roof over your head for 2 decades. You have your Ivy League school now. You won. Just let it go. Do not send me to jail over a piece of paper. We are blood. The old tools of manipulation were all laid out on the asphalt. Obligation. Guilt. Family loyalty. The biological tether of blood. 10 days ago, those words might have triggered a conditioned response in my chest. I might have felt a flicker of doubt. I might have considered compromising my own justice to maintain the peace. But standing in the Connecticut rain, armed with a fully funded Yale scholarship and a new understanding of my own worth, those words sounded hollow. They were just sounds. They held no magic. They held no power. The dynamic had entirely flipped. The puppeteer had lost her strings, and now she was standing in the mud, begging the puppet for mercy. She did not feel remorse for the theft. She did not regret watching me cry over a fake rejection screen. She only regretted that she had been caught. She was mourning the loss of her flawless reputation, not the loss of her daughter. I looked down at her ruined Italian leather shoes, soaking in the iridescent puddle of motor oil. I looked back up at her panicked mascara-stained face. I realized that the hardest part of surviving a toxic household is not escaping the physical structure. The hardest part is recognizing that the person who built the cage will never apologize for locking the door. They will only demand that you hand back the key. I tightened my grip on the umbrella handle. The conversation was over. The physical boundary was set. But now I had to enforce the psychological one. I had to deliver the final verdict. And I knew exactly what I needed to say to sever the tether forever. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the taut nylon of my umbrella. Cynthia stood shivering in the toxic puddle of motor oil and cold water, her expensive trench coat ruined, her face a smeared canvas of desperation. She looked up at me, waiting for the familiar programming to activate. For 25 years, she had meticulously installed a psychological trigger inside my chest. It was a mechanism built on manufactured guilt, designed to deploy whenever I prioritized my own survival over her convenience. She had pressed that button 1,000 times. She pressed it when she handed me a stack of community college brochures. She pressed it when she orchestrated my daily daycare pickups. She was pressing it now, using the word mother as a weapon, expecting my compliance to automatically follow. I stood in the center of the downpour and analyzed the sensation in my chest. I waited for the heavy, suffocating blanket of obligation to fall over my shoulders. I waited for the ghost of guilt to materialize and force my gaze to the floor. Nothing happened. The trigger was broken. The wiring had been cut the moment I opened the black binder in the Yale boardroom. I looked at the shivering woman in front of me and realized I no longer saw a matriarch. I saw a failed architect. I saw an administrator who had embezzled funds from a subsidiary and was now begging the auditor to shred the paperwork. Her tears were not born of remorse for stealing my future. They were born of terror because her own future was about to be dictated by a state prosecutor. I did not raise my voice to compete with the storm. I did not scream. Nor did I cry. I adopted the cold, measured tone of an executive closing a bankrupt division. You did not do this out of love, I said. The words cut through the hiss of the rain, sharp and undeniable. You did it for control, and I am done paying for your choices. Cynthia opened her mouth, a fresh wave of panic rising in her throat. But she had no script left to read. The illusion was dead. I did not wait for a rebuttal. I shifted my weight, turning my shoulder, and stepped around her. I moved with a fluid, deliberate grace, leaving her standing in the oily puddle. She reached out, her wet fingers grasping at the empty air where I had just been. But I was already walking away. I crossed the cracked asphalt and approached the brightly lit emergency entrance. The automatic sliding glass doors parted, welcoming me into the sterile, temperature-controlled lobby. The harsh fluorescent lights felt bracing. I collapsed my umbrella, shaking the excess water onto the entrance mat, and walked directly to the front security desk. A uniformed guard sat behind a high semicircular counter, watching a bank of monitors. I retrieved my hospital identification badge from my pocket and set it on the laminate surface. I need to issue a formal trespass warning, I stated, my voice projecting calm authority. The guard looked up, surprised by the request. He glanced from my badge to my face. Is there a specific individual causing a disturbance? Miss. I turned and pointed through the wide glass panels of the lobby. Cynthia was still standing in the parking lot, a dark, solitary silhouette illuminated by the red neon glow of the emergency sign. She was staring at the building, paralyzed by the realization that I had actually walked away, the woman in the beige coat I instructed. She is not a patient, and she is not authorized to be on the premises. If she attempts to enter this facility or if she approaches me during my shift, I want her escorted off the property. If she resists, please contact the local precinct. The guard followed my gaze. Assessing the soaked figure in the lot, he nodded, typing a quick note into his daily log. Understood. I will dispatch an officer to the lot to ask her to vacate the premises. You are safe here. Thank you, I said. I turned away from the desk and walked toward the staff corridor. Behind me, the automatic sliding glass doors began to close. I listened closely. Through the ambient noise of the hospital lobby, I heard the heavy metallic click of the deadbolts engaging on the external entrance. triggering the after-hours security protocol. That sharp mechanical noise echoed in my ears. It was the sound of a permanent boundary sliding into place. It locked the rainy street out. It locked Cynthia out. As I walked down the brightly lit hallway toward the records department, a profound physical lightness spread through my limbs. The final tether snapped. The ghost of guilt evaporated into the sterile air. I was free. The emotional labor of protecting my family from the consequences of their own actions was no longer my burden to carry. The police report I filed would remain active. The Nebraska state authorities would subpoena her bank records. The financial audit would expose the fraudulent transfer of the $25. 000 stamp grant. Cynthia would face a grand jury for forgery and identity theft. Ryan, acting out of ruthless self-preservation. It would cooperate fully with the prosecution to avoid disbarment. The sprawling 5-bedroom colonial. The house I had scrubbed and painted and maintained would be listed on the market. The state would force a liquidation of the asset to pay back the stolen educational funds. Harper would have to pack her designer clothes into cardboard boxes. She would have to explain to the neighborhood association why the Golden family was suddenly moving into a cramped apartment. The pristine suburban kingdom was going to burn to the ground. Ignited by the very spark Cynthia had tried to extinguish, I pushed open the door to the windowless records room. The rhythmic hum of the overhead lights greeted me. I sat down at my terminal, logged into the database, and placed my fingers on the keyboard. This was my final night shift. In exactly 8 hours, the sun would rise over the East Coast. I would hand in my badge, walk out of this basement, and officially become a Yale student. The war was won. The future was secure. But as the hours ticked by, and the hospital settled into its quiet, pre-dawn rhythm, my mind turned toward the aftermath. Winning a war guarantees survival, but it does not dictate how you are supposed to live in peacetime. I had spent 4 years defined by my servitude. In the last few months, defined by my vengeance. Tomorrow morning, the adrenaline would fade. I would have to figure out who Riley Clark was when she was not fighting for her life. The silence of the coming morning promised a new kind of challenge, one that required building a life rather than tearing one down. A full calendar year turned over, replacing the stifling memories of the Midwest with the sharp, crisp air of a Connecticut autumn. October in New Haven arrives with a brilliant display of copper and gold leaves lining the historic green. I start my mornings walking across those centuries-old stone pathways. I carry a simple cup of dark roast coffee, breathing in the scent of damp earth and approaching frost. The anxiety that used to govern my every waking moment is gone. I no longer wake up dreading a list of fabricated chores. I do not spend my mornings calculating how to avoid triggering a domestic crisis. My time belongs entirely to me. I move through the world with a quiet, steady rhythm, unburdened by the weight of someone else's expectations. I am a sophomore at Yale University. The transition from an underpaid logistics clerk to an Ivy League scholar required a brutal level of dedication. I maintain a 3.9 grade average because I treat my education with the reverence of a survivor holding a life raft. I chose to major in computer science, focusing specifically on computational ethics. The discipline explores the moral implications of data structures and algorithmic accountability. It examines how systems can be corrupted, manipulated, and weaponized against the vulnerable. I understand corrupted systems intimately because I survived one. I sit in tiered lecture halls and debate the ethics of information control, drawing on a very personal education in forgery and digital deception. I am currently designing a program that detects anomalies in institutional financial routing, ensuring that the architecture of the future cannot be rigged the way my past was. My evenings are spent in the quiet sanctuary of the law library. The room smells of aged paper and leather bindings. Oliver usually joins me. He is in his final year, preparing for the grueling reality of the bar exam. Our dynamic has evolved from a desperate alliance into a profound, quiet partnership. We share long oak tables covered in textbooks, highlighters, and legal pads. We do not spend our time dissecting the trauma of my family. We talk about case law, artificial intelligence bias, and our respective ambitions. He is an intellectual equal who never views me as a broken thing. Meeting, repair, we both grew up in environments designed to keep us small. We both used legal frameworks to break out. This mutual respect forms a foundation much stronger than any shared history. The contrast between my current reality and the wreckage left behind in Omaha is stark. I do not actively seek out information regarding my mother or my sister. The updates arrive periodically through formal channels. The state prosecutor sends brief, sterile emails detailing the progress of the financial fraud case. Cynthia avoided a federal prison sentence by accepting a devastating plea deal. The court mandated full financial restitution to repay the stolen merit grant, along with steep punitive damages. Her pristine public image dissolved overnight. The neighborhood association she once ruled ostracized her. The women who used to drink her champagne now crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. The social currency she valued above her own daughter evaporated in an instant. The 5-bedroom Droom Colonial was liquidated to satisfy the court orders. Harper lost her imported Italian tile, her expansive nursery, and her wealthy husband. Ryan finalized the divorce with surgical precision. He secured his status at the corporate law firm by cooperating entirely with the prosecution. He threw his mother-in-law to the wolves to save his own career. A fitting end for a man who always prioritized his reputation over his relationships. Harper now rents a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She navigates joint custody and the bitter reality of a fractured facade. She is forced to work a demanding retail job to support herself. She experiences the kind of manual exhaustion she used to farm out to me for $20 a week. She has to raise her own children without an invisible servant, standing in the shadows. I have not spoken a single word to either of them since the night the hospital security doors locked the rain out. My phone has never buzzed with an incoming call from their numbers. The silence is profound. Some people ask if I miss my family. The honest answer is no. I do not miss the people who treated my potential as a threat and my labor as an entitlement. I mourn the concept of a family. I miss the mother and sister I deserved. The supportive dynamic that other students describe when they call home on Sunday afternoons. I grieve for an illusion that never actually existed. Recognizing the difference between mourning a fantasy and missing reality brought me ultimate peace. Forgiveness is often framed as a requirement for healing, but I learned that moving forward does not require pardoning the thief. It simply requires leaving the scene of the crime. I built a new life by focusing on the present, pouring my energy into academic research and the authentic connections I cultivated in Connecticut. I sleep soundly through the night. The recurring nightmares about missing deadlines and scrubbing stains out of Persian rugs stopped months ago. My cracked, dry hands healed, the rough calluses replaced by smooth skin. I returned to my dorm room after a long study session. The space is small, but it is a fortress of my own making. A vintage oak desk sits under a large window, overlooking the central courtyard. I drop my canvas tote bag onto the chair and turn on a small brass reading lamp. The warm yellow light illuminates a dark wood frame resting on the corner of the desk. The frame holds 2 pieces of paper mounted side by side behind non-reflective glass. On the right rests the new acceptance letter printed on thick cream stationery with a flawless blue crest. On the left sits the original document. The paper is warped and rippled. The blue ink is smeared and feathered from the champagne. Cynthia dropped it into... It looks like a casualty of war. I reach out and touch the smooth glass covering the ruined letter. My mother buried this piece of paper in the dark corner of her dresser for 460 days. She thought she was burying my future. She thought hiding the proof of my capability would starve my ambition and keep me tethered to her floorboards forever. She treated my life like a problem she could sweep under the rug, expecting me to quietly decay in the shadows of her golden child. I look at the smeared ink and the sharp, defiant crest beside it. She forgot how dirt works. She tried to bury me. She just did not know I was a seed. The American Family album is a curated exhibition. We smile through the flash, framing the achievements of our children, highlighting the harmony of our households, and hiding the deep, stretching shadows that fall just outside the frame. But what happens when the very institution meant to nurture a child becomes the mechanism of their destruction? Through the harrowing journey of Riley Clark, a young woman who discovered her Yale acceptance letter hidden in her mother's dresser 4 years too late, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about parenting, individual agency, and the dark underbelly of traditional family values. Riley's story is not merely a tale of a stolen document. It is a chilling exploration of what occurs when a parent views a child not as an independent breathing soul to be cultivated, but as a subsidized domestic asset to be exploited. In American culture, we place a premium on family loyalty and the concept of taking care of our own. It is a cornerstone of the traditional family structure. However, Cynthia's obsession with propping up her crown jewel, Harper, weaponized this traditional value into a devastating tool of structural abuse. Cynthia fell into the insidious golden child trap. She did not look at her 2 daughters and see 2 young women with equal rights to the American dream. She saw a hierarchy of convenience. Riley's brilliant mind, her relentless work ethic, and her Ivy League potential were not celebrated. Instead, they were cold-bloodedly assessed for their market value and then liquidated to buy suburban comfort for her sister. Parents must realize that true emotional awareness in raising children means recognizing the distinct inherent worth of each individual child. When a parent sacrifices one child's future to subsidize another's present, they are not building a family legacy. They are orchestrating a tragedy. They are transforming the family home from a sanctuary of growth into a cartel of convenience. The psychological violence inflicted upon Riley is perhaps the most devastating element of this narrative. For it, 460 days. Riley scrubbed floors, picked up dry cleaning, and raised her sister's children, all while internalizing a carefully constructed, venomous lie. Cynthia used the warm mask of maternal support to gaslight her daughter, whispering that Yale is for exceptional children and that Riley was only suited for stability. This is the ultimate betrayal of parental responsibility. The fundamental duty of a parent is to mirror a child's highest potential back to them, to be the wind at their back when the world tells them they are not enough. Instead, Cynthia became a suffocating gravity. By redefining Riley's worth to match the family's convenience, she committed a profound emotional larceny. It serves as a stark reminder that honesty and fairness are not just abstract moral ideals in parenting. They are the psychological oxygen a child needs to survive. Without them, a child suffocates in the suffocating illusion of their own mediocrity. Yet, out of this profound betrayal, Riley's narrative emerges as a masterclass in reclaiming one's worth. Her evolution from an exhausted logistics clerk with cracked, bleach-stained hands into a formidable Yale scholar offers a brilliant blueprint for resilience. When Riley uncovered the staggering depths of her mother's betrayal, which escalated from emotional manipulation to federal crimes like forgery and identity theft, she did not crumble into the role of the perpetual victim. She used her intellect, her patience, and the legal system as her weapons. Her story screams a vital message to young people trapped in toxic environments. Education and financial literacy are your ultimate tools of liberation. You do not have to internalize the low ceiling someone else built for you. You have the power to tear down the roof. Furthermore, this story forces us to look in the mirror and deeply question the boundaries of familial obligation. In our society, family loyalty is too often wielded as a shield to excuse behavior that would be deemed criminal in any other context. Cynthia genuinely believed that the domestic sphere insulated her from the laws of the outside world. She assumed that blood ties provided absolute immunity from consequence. She was catastrophically wrong. Integrity must be the bedrock of any family structure, a perfect facade built on forged signatures, stolen merit grants. And the indentured servitude of a daughter is nothing more than a house of cards waiting for a strong gust of wind. Riley provided that wind not through hysterical screaming matches, but through the cold, undeniable execution of the truth. This brings us to the most profound, unconventional lesson of Riley's journey. A sharp critique of how we process trauma and how society demands reconciliation. Conventional American wisdom insists that forgiveness is the ultimate requirement for healing. We are taught that to truly move on, we must turn the other cheek, sit across from our abusers at the holiday table, and offer grace. We are told that holding on to anger is toxic. Riley's story boldly and beautifully rejects this mandated absolution. She proves that the myth of forced forgiveness is often just another tool used by abusers and enablers to evade accountability. Riley shows us that moving forward does not require pardoning the thief who stole your youth. You do not have to forgive the person who tried to erase you. Healing simply requires leaving the scene of the crime. By issuing a formal trespass warning and legally locking the door behind her, Riley established that her peace was non-negotiable. She chose herself over the comfort of her abusers, proving that sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away without looking back. We must ask ourselves what we are building within our own walls. Are we cultivating the potential of the people we love? Or are we burying it to serve ourselves? If you find yourself reflecting on the hidden dynamics of your own life, if Riley's journey of betrayal and ultimate triumph resonates with the silent battles you fought behind closed doors, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe and follow Sophia Vengeance for more stories that peel back the polished veneer of polite society to reveal the raw beating heart of truth beneath. We explore the narratives that challenge us, break us, and ultimately remake us. In the end, Riley's quiet victory at her antique oak dorm desk, looking at the water-damaged letter next to the pristine new one, perfectly encapsulates the human spirit's refusal to be extinguished. Her mother believed she was burying a problem deep in the dark recesses of a wooden dresser, expecting it to wither and die out of sight. But that is the fatal flaw of those who rely on manipulation and control rather than unconditional love. They fundamentally misunderstand the very nature of what they are trying to suppress. Cynthia thought she was burying a threat. She forgot how dirt works. She didn't realize she was planting a seed. And perhaps that is the most terrifying and beautiful truth of the human condition. The soil of our deepest betrayals is often the exact place where we finally learn how to bloom. We do not grow because we were kept in the dark. We grow in spite of it, reaching violently for a sun they swore we would never see.